Hello everyone, thank you for joining today's session. My name is Tom Lynam. I am the Global PPM Marketing Lead here at AXELOS. Today I am delighted to be joined by PeopleCert and also Klas Skogmar from Arkatay. Before I jump into introductions though, I would like to just cover off a couple of housekeeping points. So everyone will appear, all the attendees, you'll appear as if you are just on your own in the session. Don't worry, you're not alone. We do have a number of people who have joined today. If you do have any issues during the session, please do message me and I will try and do what I can from this end. We will also be running a couple of polls today. So when we make one of those live, we'll obviously talk you through it. A box should appear on the screen somewhere for you to answer the questions, and we would appreciate it if you did fill those in. I do have to apologise though for anyone who's joining via a tablet device. That functionality is not available. It's an issue with WebEx, so I can only apologise with that. We are also planning to run a Q&A session at the end once Klas has finished presenting. So please do send your questions in during the session when you think of them. And if any are appropriate or applicable at a given time during the session, Klas is happy to answer any that come in. So I would encourage you to send your best questions in. At the end of the session, we will also be asking for your feedback, and again, we'd very much appreciate it if you did complete it. It should just appear in a pop-up box after the session. And finally, we are recording today's session, so we will send a link out with the recording afterwards. So please do forward that on to any colleagues who you think will find the session useful. Okay, so without further ado, let me first introduce our Michael McLaughlin from PeopleCert. Michael is one of 6 regional managers for PeopleCert, covering the whole globe, and he focuses purely on UK and Ireland and also North America. So Michael, welcome to today's session, and over to you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you all for joining us today. What I'd like to do is start out and sort of show you what PeopleCert is about. Tom, if you could bring up the slides, we could go from there. That'd be great. Thanks, Tom. As Tom mentioned, I'm one of the regional managers responsible to PeopleCert for conveying the ideas that we have regarding accreditation and certification. PeopleCert is a leader in accreditation and certification. We have delivered in the past 15 years over 4 million examinations. These are primarily IT related, but we also have some language certification programs that we've been running for a number of years as well. And recently we just took over all the assets of City and Guilds to deliver their language certification. We deliver and have delivered these examinations in over 150 countries every year. So we do have a very strong global reach through our very powerful network of exam distribution and regional managers. We deliver these examinations in a traditional way of printing and sending them to the venue. We also send PDFs of examinations to a venue for you to print out, and we also provide web-based examinations. In addition to being able to take an examination on PC, we also have the ability to manage an examination with a live web invigilator or web proctor who is one of the PeopleCert trained people. We do that again through a web camera, and that's been gathering an awful lot of attention the past 3 years. We do thousands of those every month. We have also 10,000 locations around the globe through our partnership with Pearson VUE and another certification organization called Prometric. So we have vast capabilities of delivering the examinations through that network as well as through our own network. In addition to that, we have close to 8,000 external partners, contractors, associates that do ad hoc jobs for us, depending upon what the needs are. And we also are a strategic partner of AXELOS, which means that we deliver all of their examinations in all of the languages available in all formats via either computer-based or paper-based. The commitment to quality that PeopleCert talks about is proven in the accreditations and the certifications we have. I guess everybody could talk about quality, but we have been accredited by a body comparable to UCAS, the United Kingdom Accreditation Service. We've been accredited for ISO 17024, which means that we are monitored and audited in our creation of personal certifications. So if your organization wants to create a personal certification, we can assist you with that, and that's all under the aegis of our ISO 17024 accreditation. We also have the ability to create certification for products and services and processes under another accreditation. And then on the certification side, as far as quality is concerned, we meet the international standards for ISO 9000 for quality management, for customer satisfaction, which is rather an unusual international certification, but we meet that. That means all of our people have gone through a program and are certified, and we are audited on handling customer complaints. We certainly do have some from time to time as any organization, but our standards are watched very closely. We also are certified for environmental management and, importantly, information and data security in ISO 27000. In addition to that, we also have certification for the delivery of assessments and business continuity. As far as the commitment to customer service is concerned, one of the things that has been very strong for us over the years is our commitment to a nonstop operation, so that people are available to you on a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week, 365-day-a-year basis, so that if you have a question or a problem with an examination, by contacting PeopleCert, you will speak with a live person. It's not voicemail. Somebody will answer and talk to you about a particular problem that you're having every hour of the year. We provide this in multilingual services over 11 languages, and that's growing. And all of our staff, as I mentioned before, are certified with a customer service qualification. The communication is done primarily via phone, and these phone lines are either toll-free or local numbers in 30 different countries. We also certainly support online forums and live chat as well as email. So that is our commitment to your service and our commitment to quality. And Tom, I'll hand it back to you at this stage.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Michael. Just before I hand over to Klas, I would like to very briefly introduce him. Klas is part of Arkatay Consulting. He's a PMI registered education provider, trainer. He's a PRINCE2 certified trainer, a member of the Swedish ISO Standardization Committee for Project, Program and Portfolio Management, and he's also a part of the PMI REP advisory group. Well, thank you, Klas, for agreeing to present on today's session. This is in part off the back of how he authored last year's white paper that was published by AXELOS and is available on our website to download, which was titled PRINCE2, the PMBOK Guide and ISO 21500. So without further ado, Klas, welcome to today's session, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. So can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you, and I'm just passing over the presenter rights to you now.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you for that nice introduction. And I can just add that besides teaching project management, I'm helping large organizations in project management, organizations such as IKEA, Son Ericsson, Baxter, Tetra Pak, and also big parts of the public sector in Sweden. And I can also add that our organization is entirely focused on ensuring sustainable project success. We mean that project success is not something that you should do once. You should sustain success over time, but projects should also have an aspect of sustainability in them. So that was briefly about me and my company. So I will continue with the agenda. So what we will cover today is sort of a brief introduction of PMBOK and a brief introduction of PRINCE2, and then I will talk a little bit about the relationships between them, and then I will talk about how to combine them and how they differ, and then we'll wrap it up with a little bit of a case scenario and some key takeaways. But before I continue, I would like to have a brief understanding of the audience. Therefore, Tom, could you manage this poll?
Yep. Okay. So the poll should have appeared now, and I see some answers coming in. So great. Thank you for completing that. And the question is, do you, or how many of these methodology standards have you worked with? And the options are PMBOK, PRINCE2, both, or neither. So just give people a little bit more time to complete that. We've got over 50% of people have responded, which is great. So just give it another couple of seconds. Okay, and I'm just going to close that now in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so the system just takes another 15, 20 seconds to process the results, but it's looking like we have, we've got quite an even split between both and PRINCE2. So if I just have a look. Okay, so in terms of the percentage responses, C came out highest with both, and that was at 29%. B was with PRINCE2 at 26%, followed by the PMBOK at 12%, and neither at 3%.
Perfect. So that gives me a little bit of sense of how I should, where I should put my focus during this webinar. I will do a little bit of introduction of PMBOK, and since that is where the least amount of people had their skills or knowledge, I will just mention a little bit about that one. So the first version of PMBOK was published in 1996. It's published by PMI, Project Management Institute, which is the largest non-profit organization in the world, which with regards to volunteering in project management. And they launched the 5th edition in 2013, and the 6th edition will come now in January 2017. And they provide a standard that is called the PMBOK guide that provides knowledge that is generally recognized as a good practice. And it's the contents of the PMBOK guide is applicable to most projects most of the time. And the annex is an American standard. So 40 of those 600 pages in the PMBOK guide is the American standard. And if you go into and look in the PMBOK guide, you will find a lot of processes, 47 processes, and they cover 10 different knowledge areas. And it covers, the knowledge areas are integration, scope, time, costs, quality, human resource, communications, risk, procurement, and stakeholder. And then there's 5 process groups, initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. And the process can look like this in the PMBOK guide. So it describes some inputs, some outputs, and some techniques on how you should manage that specific process. So here's an example of defining scope. So that is basically something that a project manager does when he manages a project. Sometime during his project, he will define the scope of the project. And this process takes some inputs. It takes a scope management plan, project chart, and things like that, and then you get project scope statement and project document updates. And then you convert the inputs to those outputs through some tools and techniques. You could use, for example, product analysis or facilitated workshops. And this, the way the PMBOK is written is to ensure that even though each project is unique, you can still repeat the repeatable things in projects that you can reuse from project to project. You have certain knowledge, certain skills as a project manager that is repeatable, and they have defined those as processes in the PMBOK guide. So if we look a little bit more on PRINCE2 instead, the PRINCE2 was, the first version was published in 1989, and then at the time it was called PRINCE, and the current edition was published in 2009. It can, PRINCE2 as the PMBOK, it's very similar in the type of projects you can apply to. So it says that PRINCE2 can be applied to any project regardless of project scale, type, organization, geography, or culture. So this seems very similar, but so then the question is, what are the differences? And I will highlight that soon. But first, I will give you a little brief introduction to what PRINCE2 covers. So PRINCE2 consists of a set of principles, a set of themes, and a set of processes. And the principles are really important, so I will highlight them on the next slide. And the PRINCE2 themes are similar to the knowledge areas of PMBOK guide. You have business case, organization, quality, plans, risk, change, and progress. And then PRINCE2 also has 7 processes, and these processes are more from an organizational point of view, whereas the PMBOK guide's processes are more from the project manager's point of view. And if I just highlight the principles of PRINCE2, it says that PRINCE2 principles, there are 7. It's continued business justification, learn from experience, define roles and responsibilities, manage by stages, manage by exception, focus on products, and tailor to suit the project environment. And personally, I really like working with principles. Principles is something that you use when you don't know exactly what you're supposed to do. You can always follow the principle or a set of principles. And PRINCE2 has really incorporated the principles into its methodology. Let's say, for example, learn from experience. In many organizations I've been in Sweden, it's very common that they only do a lessons learned workshop at the end of the project, and that's it. Usually what is the output from that lessons learned workshop is forgotten in the organization. But PRINCE2, it says that, has a lot of different things. It says that a project manager, when he starts a new project, it's his responsibility to learn from previous projects in the organization. And the project manager should manage a lessons log to capture all lessons learned during the project, so he doesn't forget them. So usually what happens is, if you run a lessons learned workshop at the end of a project, you will have forgotten everything in the project. So it's good to have a lessons log. PRINCE2 also says that all reports, all weekly reports, or at the end of stages or at the end of the project, all of those should contain a section called lessons learned. And that is very good as well, that you enforce a project manager to learn and write down what they have learned during the project. And all plans in PRINCE2 also have lessons applied, so you force a project manager to describe what lessons he has applied during the project. And this is just one of these principles. I just highlighted one of them to ensure you get a feeling for how important principles can be for managing projects. So that was a little bit on PMBOK Guide and PRINCE2. And now I will go over to talk a little bit about the relationships between them. So first I will go through the basic relationships, and then I will highlight a couple of differences between these, the two of them. So first, let's just look at the triangle like this one. What you have here is principles at the top and tools and techniques at the bottom. So it's basically giving more details as you go down this pyramid. So in the top of it, you have abstract principles, and then terminology defining how you should talk about things. Then you go over to what the project manager is doing, and then you go down to more structured things, what the organization needs to manage projects, and then at the end you have specific techniques and tools that a project manager or the organization is using to apply a project. You could also divide up this and say that sort of the top parts of this pyramid is a little bit why you manage your projects, and then you go over to what you do when you manage your projects. And the bottom parts of the pyramid is how you do things to manage a project. And if you take a look at PRINCE2 and the PMBOK Guide and put them in this pyramid, PMBOK Guide, it gives a terminology, and it has been almost become standardized in this terminology, that because the PMBOK Guide is so spread around the world. So as we'll see soon, there's, for example, competition between terminology in PMBOK Guide and PRINCE2 with regards to things like work breakdown structure versus product breakdown structure. And we will have a look on how this terminology differences can be resolved. But PMBOK Guide, it focuses a lot of what the project manager is doing in a project. So what the project manager does, it's like if you ask a project manager, what do you do when you manage your project? Well, I manage scope, I manage time, I manage costs, I manage risks. And then if you ask him, but what do you do when you manage scope? Well, I define my scope, I create a work breakdown structure, and all of those are processes. It's what PMBOK Guide is doing very well. It describes what a project manager is doing, and then in those processes, it also gives the actual techniques, the tools and techniques on how to convert the inputs to outputs. But those tools and techniques, they are very detailed. It can be things like ground rules, earned value, critical path, critical chain. It can be things like IT tools or estimation or product-based planning. So the PMBOK Guide goes into details and the tools and techniques, and it describes what the project manager is doing besides the terminology. But it lacks a part here in the pyramid, which is a little bit of the structure that an organization needs to manage projects. It's to ensure, this structure is needed to ensure that projects are managed in the same way from an organizational perspective. So, and this is what PRINCE2 is doing very well. It focuses a lot on roles and responsibilities, on how gates and stages, on management project descriptions, and templates, and it gives some processes from an organizational point of view that supports the project manager and the organization in making projects repeatable. And if you have seen organizations that have adopted PMBOK Guide, usually they need to come up with a project management methodology of their own. So they will have some sort of customized project management methodology. But here today I will show that PRINCE2 and PMBOK Guide work very well together. So PRINCE2 also has these principles that I talked about that I think is very valuable. And of course, PRINCE2 does define a little bit of terminology. It describes a little bit of what the project manager is doing, and it also gives some tools and techniques, such as project-based planning. But mostly they differ a little bit in what they cover. So let's go over to look at a little bit of the major differences between PRINCE2 and the PMBOK guide. And I will highlight phases, stages, business case, organization, and scope management. Actually, I will not cover quality today because I want to keep it this session brief. So phases and stages, it's in PMBOK, they describe phases that they can be in 3 different types of phases. You can have sequential phases, you can have overlapping phases, and you can have iterative types of phases. And this is done to ensure that PMBOK guide can support all types of organizations. It can support everything from agile methodologies to different types of projects that are managed in overlapping or sequential stages or phases. But PRINCE2, on the other hand, it makes a distinction between what is specialist work and management stages. And I think this is really valuable and a really good thing that you need to remember. So this is a big difference between them, and that a stage in PRINCE2 can never overlap another stage. So they are always separated in time. And what happens is that, well, if you have things like a management stage where you focus on specifying things, and then you might have a management stage where you design things, and it doesn't mean that you do all of the specification at the first stage and all of the designing in the second stage. Instead, the management stages are splitting specialist work, and you will need to figure out the difference between your specialist work and the management stages. So management stages in PRINCE2 is used to provide a control over the project to ensure that the delegation of the project is done one stage at a time. So this is an important feature of PRINCE2 and a big difference between how PMBOK and PRINCE2 is being managed. Another big area of difference is the business case. So in PMBOK guide, you have your business case even before the start of the project. It's actually one of the inputs to the process-defined project charter, which is the first process in PMBOK. And then you get your project charter, and when you have elaborated your project charter, you get your project management plan. And in PRINCE2, it looks slightly different. In PRINCE2, you start with your mandate, which sort of is your authority to initiate any work on the project at all. And then during the initial pre-project part of the project, you will develop your project brief. And when you do that, you will get your outline business case. And then you do your planning of the project, and then you get your project initiation documentation, which is very similar to the project management plan in PMBOK guide. But in PRINCE2, they say that you only get your business case, or rather your detailed business case, only after you have planned your project. So whereas in PMBOK guide, you have your business case even before you charter your project, in PRINCE2, you get your business case after you have planned your project. And this is a very important distinction. And in some organizations and in some types of businesses, one of them usually suits better than the other. So if you're a contractor doing contract work for other organizations, maybe it's better to think about your business case. You get your business case early, maybe from a sales organization, and then you charter your project, and then you plan your project. Whereas in PRINCE2, it's usually better to work with when you have an internal organization. You can mix them, and you can adjust and adopt some of the principles or the viewpoint from PMBOK guide into a PRINCE2 project. So, for example, to ensure that you have some aspects of a business case already in your mandate in a PRINCE2 project. And you could also work in the PMBOK guide setting and ensure that you revise your business case and you say that you have your final business case only after you have your project management plan. But the distinction is good to be aware of. So that was an important distinction between the business case. And then let's move over to the organization. So in the PMBOK guide, it doesn't define many roles. Basically, it only defines the sponsor and the project manager, whereas in PRINCE2, it defines many more roles, and here are just a few of them. It defines the steering group, it defines the team managers or sub-project managers, it defines the project manager. It also defines additional roles such as change authority, and it defines how roles for assurance and support. And so that's also a big difference between PMBOK guide and PRINCE2. And this also, some organizations prefer the simpler version where you don't have many complex roles to have a look at, but it's if you need more roles than just the sponsor and project manager, it's very beneficial to adopt the PRINCE2 roles to your organization. And another feature of the organizational aspect here is that since PRINCE2 defines many more roles, it can also define how things are delegated. And in PRINCE2, this is actually one of the things that is fantastic about PRINCE2, is that whenever you delegate, it describes how you delegate. And in PRINCE2, you delegate using tolerances. So you describe, well, you get responsibility for this project, but if you deviate too much with regards to time, cost, quality, risks, benefits, or anything like that, then you need to tell me, and then I want to know it immediately. So that's the way of delegating in PRINCE2. When the corporate and program management delegates to the project board, they delegate the responsibility for the entire project. So the project board is accountable for the project, but they delegate the management, operational management to the project manager. But they only give him the accountability for one stage at a time. So even though the project manager is responsible for managing the project, he's only accountable for one stage at a time in PRINCE2. The project manager, in his turn, is delegating work packages to team managers. And he says that the team manager is only accountable for work package. So that's a good way of looking at it. And this is a very good way of managing projects. And all organizations, I think, even if they're only using PMBOK, should adopt this type of thinking in their organization. So that was briefly about organization. Then we'll talk a little bit about differences in scope. And by the way, Tom, are you monitoring questions here while we're talking?
Yeah, we've not had any sort of relevant for the topic you're on yet.
Okay, good. Okay, then there's a big difference in scope as well. There are many similarities, but there's also difference. So in PMBOK guide, first you collect your requirements from your stakeholders. And based on those requirements, you define your scope, what's included, what's not included. Based on that, you create your work breakdown structure, and then your work breakdown structure dictionary. And then you define your activities, and then you sequence your activities. In PRINCE2, it's kind of similar. First, you write your product description, and when you do that, a part of doing that is actually to understand the customer's quality expectations, and it's kind of similar to collect requirements and and to defining your scope. Then you create your product breakdown structure. Then you write product descriptions, which is similar to creating work breakdown structure dictionary. But then there's a big difference in that in the PRINCE2, you create a product flow diagram between deliverables. So you track dependencies between deliverables before you identify your activities and further dependencies. So I will illustrate this in the following graph. So in PRINCE2, you can see that you collect input from various stakeholders. You write your product description, and then you create your product breakdown structure, which is the blue tree. And then in the middle, in the below picture here, you can see that the green parts represent product descriptions. And then finally, you create your product flow diagram, which is dependencies between your deliverables, and then you define your activities. Whereas in PMBOK guide, you do slightly different. You collect your requirements instead, and then based on your requirements, you write your project scope statement, and then you create a work breakdown structure, and that will be the lower left, and then in the middle it will be creating work breakdown structure dictionary. But then you go and define your activities before you track your dependencies. So this is an important, there are many similarities, but there are also some differences. And you could combine a few of these aspects. For example, some strength in the PMBOK guide is its focus on requirements, whereas the strength of PRINCE2 is its focus on projects. Sometimes you get an issue with both of them when you try to break down your project. In most of the standards out there, when it comes to breaking down a project, even a work breakdown structure should be product-oriented. So, for example, if you read NATO's guide on work breakdown structure or American military standards on work breakdown structures, you will see that a work breakdown structure should be product-oriented. So that makes them very similar to each other. But there are other that are using work breakdown structures that create a breakdown not only on products but more on including other types of work, and that makes them slightly different, and in some cases that might be needed. So it can be good to be aware of both these methodologies and to apply them whenever you need to. So then I think it's time for the second poll, Tom.
Yep, that's just on live. So the question is, how are you personally working with scope? And the options are, I break down deliverables like PBS, I break down work like WBS, I track dependencies of deliverables like product flow diagram, or D, I track dependencies of activities like in the PMBOK. So I can see we've got some responses coming in, so thank you for that. We'll just give people another 10 to 20 seconds or so to complete that. We're over 50% of responses. Okay. And I would just encourage everyone, if you do have any questions, either to answer during the session or after Klas has finished presenting, please do send those in. And I'm just going to close the poll now in 3, 2, 1. Okay. Right. So in terms of the results, for A, we have, so for A, I break down deliverables like PBS, we have 32%. I break work down like WBS is 32%. I track dependencies of deliverables like the product flow diagram is about a third of that at 12%. And then D, I track dependencies of activities like in PMBOK is at 24%. So fairly reasonable splits across the board there.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting, and it's interesting to see that it's as many that break down deliverables like in product breakdown structures as in work breakdown structures. And sometimes even if you use the work breakdown structure, you might be doing similar things as the product breakdown structure. I also think that it's kind of common that people track dependencies of activities more than they track dependencies of deliverables. And in some situations that can be a good thing, but in many situations I would recommend most project managers to evaluate if they also could track dependencies of deliverables, because that could simplify some things for the project managers. Okay, so I'll continue, and I will talk briefly about how to combine them, and I will do that by giving a case, and this is very brief. I mean, I don't have much time in this webinar. I should finish in about 5 minutes to give room for questions. Well, I helped the Swedish public sector organization. They had a problem where all departments worked differently with projects. They had no common methodology, no common techniques, and no common terminology. So you might recognize this from your own organizations. It's not that uncommon. They had a solution to implement a new methodology. So they evaluated several options, and we helped them in designing and setting it up. So the implementation was to first set up a pre-study to decide on an approach. We worked with getting some quick wins by implementing some of the techniques, mostly from PMBOK, how you break down a project, a little bit on risk management, and a little bit on some different other topics. Then we had the decision to work with ISO, PMBOK, and no, it was primarily ISO and PRINCE2, but ISO standard is very similar to PMBOK, so basically it was the same. And then we started letting people to attend courses. We tried to embed everything in their organization. And the result was that in the end, they used mostly ISO terminology. This is still ongoing, by the way, so we're not done with this client. The principles, they selected PRINCE2. They selected roles from PRINCE2 as well. And when it came to the processes, from an organizational perspective, they selected PRINCE2, but they also picked some aspects from the PMBOK guide to simplify, especially when it came to things like procurement. We also had to look a little bit on tools and techniques from various sources, but mostly covered by the PMBOK guide. So here are some things you can try to have a look at when you try to combine them as well. And then, so before I take the final slide with some key takeaways, maybe we should have the final poll as well.
Yep, okay, so that's just gone live. So this is a follow-up question to the first poll that we ran of which of the following methodologies or standards do you think your current organization should work with? And the options are A, PMBOK, B, PRINCE2, C, both, or D, neither. So thank you again to everyone who's responding. I can see we get lots of results coming in. So just give that another 10 seconds or so. Let people respond. Okay. So I'm just going to close that in 3, 2, 1. Okay. And so it looks like, sorry, the system just needs another couple of 10 seconds to process those results. But it looks like, from what I can see initially, that the vast majority are now, okay, so yeah, it's 49% have responded with both, only 2% have said neither, and we have 5% each with PMBOK and PRINCE2. So looking at the early results, obviously more of a shift towards both over using or seeing it as an either or.
Okay, yeah, that's wonderful. I'm happy to hear this, and to get even value out of this poll, we should have asked the same thing even at the start of the webinar. But I hope that some people have seen the benefits of using both together. I would like to talk to those 2% that don't think you should use any of these. I'm just kidding. But instead, I will go over and talk a little bit how to combine these. So what I think is important when you combine them is that you need to tailor them to your needs. You need to think about all these different aspects that we've been talking about today, such as the business case, the roles and responsibilities, and various other topics. And you should pick the best from each, and if they overlap, like they do, and which I've highlighted, you need to make some choices. When you do that, you will improve the way you manage projects in your organization. So some key takeaways I want you to take with you from today is that PMBOK and PRINCE2, they do work together. They actually complement each other, so I think it's more beneficial to use both than to use either by themselves. And so we're in the second bullet, they use them together because they have different strengths, and that makes it valuable to combine. But you need also to understand the differences. There are differences, and you need to understand those differences. But finally, you need to tailor it to your needs. And tailoring is something that is encouraged both by PMBOK Guide and PRINCE2, and that makes a really big difference when you apply these together. So that was it for me, and I think we have about 10 minutes for questions.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Klas. A very interesting presentation, and as you say, please do send any questions that you have in, and we'll look to get those answered in the last sort of 10 minutes or so of today's session. So we've had a couple come in already. So the first one is around what are your thoughts about combining PBS and WBS techniques?
Yes, I think it's good. I think it's I'm actually at the moment working with the new ISO standard in work breakdown structures, and I do think you can combine product breakdown structure and work breakdown structures. And my recommendation is to first start with a breakdown in almost with results. So it's almost like that you should start with the result breakdown structure. You focus on that first. Because in some projects you might want to introduce an organizational change, a change in behavior, for example. So let's say you have an organizational change program. You want people to behave differently in the organization. And it's the change in behavior that is interesting, not the documents or the marketing materials or any other educations that you might implement. It's behavior change that you're interested in. So sometimes I recommend that you first start with sort of a result breakdown of your result. Then, if you can, I recommend that you make a product breakdown structure. So you break down what you will deliver at the end of a project. And if you deliver an airplane or a rocket like at NASA, then that is likely what you should focus on. And then if you need to have additional items to make this work, sometimes you need to add things to your breakdown structure that are unrelated to your product breakdown. Then you can make it more generic work breakdown structure, which includes other aspects as well. Or you can keep them separate. So you can either choose to combine them into one, or you can have them separate. I've seen many organizations that separate these breakdown structures, but to me, sometimes it makes sense to combine them in one as well.
Okay, great. Next question is, from your point of view, how do you see the fit of the PMBOK and PRINCE2 with the work of ISO TC 258 and then in brackets ISO 21500, etc.?
I didn't hear the first part of the question. Could you repeat that?
From your point of view, how do you see the fit of the PMBOK and PRINCE2 with the work of ISO TC 258 and then in brackets it's ISO 21500?
Yeah, I mean, it's heavily influenced by PMBOK. So you can see very much similarities from I mean, basically the knowledge areas in PMBOK guide. It's structured and split, and the processes are similar to how the PMBOK guide is organized. But I do think that there have been some contributions, for example, with regard to the business case, that have improved slightly the way you should think and consider the business case that has come from sort of PRINCE2 participants in this standardization work. I do think they could have, I mean, my view is that they could have contributed even more to influence the view on the business case. At the moment, PMBOK guide is very much organized as a supplier-buyer relationship towards project management. So you buy a project and then they deliver according to that, to the contract. And then it's PMBOK guide is very suitable for that. And that's also how the ISO standard is organized at the moment. But if you own all of the resources in an organization, I think usually the PRINCE2 view on the business case is preferable. So I think that should have been reflected more in the ISO standard as well. So I would say that it's very aligned, PMBOK and the ISO standard is very aligned to each other, but I would prefer that they should have been a little bit more influenced from the PRINCE2 people.
Yeah. Okay. The next question is, what would you say are the top 3 strengths of combining PRINCE2 and the PMBOK, in your opinion?
Well, okay, it's hard to come up with on top of my mind. One could be that you have sort of a path for a development path for project managers. So you can, because a good thing about PRINCE2 is you can take junior project managers directly out of school and you can get them their PRINCE2 certifications. Whereas you need some more experience to get the PMP certification. It also introduces a little bit more of a theoretical perspective and some more tools and techniques that can be a part of a project manager's toolbox. So what you could do is, as an organization, is to ensure that everyone gets the PRINCE2 certification first, and then for the senior project managers, and they might get salary increase when they get the P or something like that. You encourage people to get the PMP certification, because then you will improve further the way that project managers think about project management. So that's one of the things. Then another thing is that you get more perspectives covered. So in some cases, if you just follow a standard, it might be hard to break free from that standard and think from other perspectives. So by combining the two and seeing the differences, I think the tailoring can be better performed to the specific needs of your organization. So just trying to adapt the things from both will improve that. And then, it's hard to say a third one. Maybe I could leave it with 2. And so if you have more questions.
They're 2 very good. Okay, great. I mean, I suppose as well, if we add a third one, if you're using both, then and working on a global scale, then you're able to speak the same language, I suppose, globally.
Yes, very good. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Perfect. Thank you for that.
Fantastic. Okay, great. So at the end of your session, you mentioned about sort of this tailoring element, and it's come up quite a lot. Do you have any sort of initial tips on how do you go about tailoring? So taking from sort of what's in the guidance, both the PMBOK and PRINCE2, and actually tailoring that to your specific requirements.
Yeah. And I think if you read the tailoring part of PRINCE2, I think it's very good because it separates it into the dimensions. You have first the embedding. So you want to embed something in the organization. So that's from the tailoring from the organizational perspective. And then you have tailoring in each individual project. And both of these sort of tailoring to the organization, adopting a methodology and adopting a standard, but also tailoring within a specific project. Both of those are needed. So the first thing you would need to think about, especially when combining this, is sort of the embedding part of tailoring, when you try to tailor methodologies and standards to fit the specific organization. And when you do that, you need to consider what types of projects do you have. We have held workshops where we have asked people, do the different projects in this organization need different ways of being managed? And if they say yes, then we ask what are the dimensions that make them need to be managed differently? And typically, one of the dimensions that stands out is the size. So if you have a really big and complex project with a big budget, then you need more structure, more specific templates, more management, more control. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you have a very small project in scope, then usually you need less amount of bureaucracy, so to say. And so that's one of the dimensions, but there may be others. So just asking yourself, what are the dimensions? And size might be one of the dimensions, but what are the others? That's a good first question to ask your organization.
Okay, fantastic. And the next question, it's probably time just for one more. Does, in your experience, does each method favor specific industries at all, or do you find that they've been applicable and I suppose generic for across the board?
Well, yeah, sort of, and it depends a little bit because I also like, for example, Agile a lot and teach that as well, and I do, even though both of these try to incorporate Agile perspectives, you need to usually do a little bit of adapting to ensure that you cover the Agile perspective. And AXELOS just released the PRINCE2 Agile, which is a good contribution to ensure that you can cover Agile perspectives as well. And I do think that for some areas, like construction, especially in a buyer-supplier relationship, then usually the PMBOK perspective is kind of strong. And in other areas, for example, within IT and especially within internal IT, when it's not the buyer-seller relationship, then PRINCE2 is kind of strong. But for both of those situations, I think you need to embed and tailor it to your needs.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that's all the questions we've had come in. So, Klas, thank you very much for your time. I hope everyone found it as useful and interesting as I have. And thank you again to PeopleCert and Michael for joining today's session. And I would just encourage everyone to complete that feedback form and share the recording if you think any one of your colleagues would find it interesting. So again, thanks, Klas, and thanks, Michael.
You're welcome. Tom. Glad to be here.
Great. Thanks.